to the TMU Democracy Forum.
Thank you. It's a huge honor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
He's never heard me be so complimentary, so he's kind of in shock that
I'm a little, I don't know what to do now.
Okay, first a little bit of housekeeping. I'll kick off the questioning inspired by some of the suggestions we got from folks when you were registering. Then we'll open it up to the audience so you can start thinking up the questions that you want to ask if I don't ahead of you, if I don't preempt you. A reminder that we're here for questions and answers, not giving speeches or shouting slogans. That's what everyone here signed up for, because when you registered, you agreed to our code of conduct on campus. That's the deal when you walk through the doors. Okay, first question. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Personal question.
Okay.
So you have a 2-month-old baby.
Yes.
Who is here with us. Guest of honor, has kind of upstaged you.
100%. She's right there.
Dunny, she's over
Way
there.
better.
Yes. Okay. How is the family, and are you getting any sleep?
So you know what? One of our biggest arguments in the family is that Gurkiran, my wife, is really concerned that I don't sleep enough, and this has been an ongoing problem. I want to be awake, basically. I want to like do too much. I want to like after work. I want to cook always, and I also want to read books. I also want to listen to music, and I also want to do more work. And so she's like, you can't do everything. You got to sleep. And now that I have a kiddo and 2 kiddos, I put a lot of work in with them. And she's also worried about me sleeping, so I don't sleep. Now, her concern, though, is that I have passed this on to our oldest daughter, who also doesn't want to sleep.
2-year-old. Yes.
So the 2-year-old does not want to sleep, so she blames me for that because she thinks that I have somehow passed this energy on to her. So that's our one big complaint, is that I actually don't mind not sleeping. It's totally fine with me. But she's worried that I won't live longer if I don't sleep.
You're looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning, so that's good this afternoon. Okay.
No, but things are good. I'm really thankful. We have 2 girls. I'm proudly a girl dad. We've named them, first daughter, Anhad, which means limitless, and we want her to know that she is limitless. And our second daughter, Danni, has been such a gift, and we want to really celebrate that she's a gift in our life. And so her name is Danni, which means generous and benevolent. She's such a generous thing in our lives to have her. And we also want to lean into the idea that we should all remember that at our hearts, we want to take care of each other. There is a true kind of generosity at the core of human spirit. So those are the names.
So that's a long answer to a personal question. I'm going to remind you.
Those are not talking points either.
I'm going to
remind
you of our
values.
of our secret discussion ahead of time, which is when I give you the namaste, that means you're going to have to wind it up, or I'll interrupt you. Now I'm going to talk. So I almost named my daughter Hadia, which means gift in Arabic.
Cool. There you
but
go.
It came close, but
it was in the top running.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had the same thing. You'll have like, I don't know if folks maybe even thought of their names for maybe their future potential kids ahead of time. That's probably something people to do. We had a lot of names in the running, and then we narrowed it.
Okay, I'm giving you the namaste because we're gonna go beyond the naming debate. Okay, more serious question, serious stuff. Almost every public event today is targeted for protests and disruptions. It happened before the Middle East. It is you've now got bodyguards, a personal security detail that follows you a lot of places. But you've always actually been a lightning rod for as long as I've known you. Not all the time, but there are events that you are consistently targeted for. So I want to ask, you've been confronted, you've been blocked sometimes. Sometimes it's anti-vaxxers, sometimes it's disgruntled New Democrats, if there is such a thing. Imagine that. Because I've seen that and watched that. And so my question to you is, how do you deal with that? How do you respond? How do you de-escalate? And how do you explain to people, what do you say to people who don't want to let you talk?
Right, okay. So, I mean, a couple of caveats off the top. I would say I don't recommend necessarily my approach for everyone because everyone doesn't have the same life experiences.
Don't try this at home.
Don't try this at home. Yeah. It depends on like, your own personal safety and security and how you feel. So it's not something I would necessarily say everyone should do it this way. I want to put that caveat out. And a bit of the preamble for that is that I'm genuinely someone who's trained lots of martial arts. I did wrestling. I've competed in tournaments, submission grappling tournaments where like the goal is to submit your opponent. So I feel very comfortable.
The goal is to what?
To submit your opponent. So with either joint manipulation or some form of blocking blood flow to the brain. So like there's like intense things that you do. So I've trained in that, and that is my martial art. I was a kid. I used to get picked on a lot, so I used to deal with physical confrontations. As an adult, I had to deal with it. So I have a very different life experience. I'm very used to being aggressively attacked. That's something I'm not uncomfortable with. That's normal almost for me. So what I try to do is I first want to hear someone out. I try to hear people out if I can. And there's lots of examples. People can look them at YouTube and you can see the videos. One of the most notable ones was someone came up to me at an event and claimed that I was a Muslim terrorist, was really aggressive. And people were shocked that I never said that I was not a Muslim. Because first of all, I grew up with one of my best friends, who was Walid Mansour, and I would also be faced with the same thing when I was a kid, because he was a Lebanese young man that is hard to really tell what his background is. So I would also, when we were kids, be attacked and be called some form of Muslim terrorist, and he always felt bad for me. And I said, Walid, would you rather that I said, you're the Muslim, and they go after you instead? I'm like, I would never do that to you. You're my best friend. And for my life, I always believe that hatred is wrong, and so I don't want to dispel it to someone else. So I try to de-escalate. I try to connect to the person. Sometimes people just want to ask a question, and I'll hear their question out. But if the energy is disruptive to everyone in the room, I don't think it's fair for one person to monopolize the time of all the other people that are in the room. So I try to make that clear that it's not really fair that you can just be the loudest and then take away the opportunity for other folks that have other things they want to do.
And some of those clips have gone viral, some of those video clips, and in particular before you won the leadership. Maybe it helped you win the leadership. But you will say, if I can preempt you with your words, is that love can conquer hate. But that doesn't always work. So what happens when that doesn't work?
So yeah, sometimes it doesn't work. So sometimes if I try to say, like in the moment where the love conquers hate, I felt like when I saw the person in front of me, I could tell there was something really bothering them, they were hurt, and I wanted them to know that like my spiritual belief is that we're all one, and we're all here to take care of each other, and I wanted them to feel, even if you're angry at me, I still got love for you, I still value you. Sometimes people are just being bullies, really. And
sometimes there's a playbook, which is to disrupt, not just because they're feeling bad.
Exactly, exactly. So sometimes that's where you have to stand up and say, hey, I don't think it's fair that you are disrupting what everyone else. I'm not going to continue, or I'm not going to allow this to continue because you're taking away from other people's experience. So you got to stand up to that sometimes. But I think give people a chance first, hear them out, and then sometimes you have to be firm and say, that's not fair for you to just be loud and take away from someone else who maybe not have the same confidence to be loud like that, but they're not able to appreciate what's going on. So sometimes you've got to be strong and stand up to it.
So let's talk about the Middle East in a second, but before we leave the issue of disruption, a lot of people blame politicians on Parliament Hill for dragging down democratic discourse, and they particularly point the fingers at the opposition, whose job it is to oppose. You're part of the opposition. Is that part of the problem, or is that a different beast?
Well, and
if your daughter disrupts us, that doesn't count.
Yeah, totally. I was going to say, at some point, you can just pass her over. I'll be all right. I can console her if you want, James. James is my EA, who also acts as my just life support. Yeah. So if you could just give him a round of applause, because he's an amazing fellow. But James, I can hold her too at some point if you're feeling.
James was the wagon master, as we call it, during the last Ontario election campaign, where he had to shepherd the media. So if you can handle the media, you can handle anything.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Okay, so politicians, are they part of the problem?
I mean, because the problem, if we take a step back, I think there is a cynicism that exists that sometimes is a part of why people are so angry. Like, things suck, my life sucks, I can't find a place to live, I can't afford my groceries. That's genuine, legitimate anger. Like, life should not be so hard. People are like, why is life so hard? And there's anger because of that. That is legitimate. And then when politicians lean into cynicism, don't actually provide real solutions, try to distract from the real problems people are going through by punching down and beating up on marginalized communities like we're seeing in Alberta, where Alberta has an electricity grid that's falling apart, healthcare that's falling apart, has education system that's in shambles because of all these cuts, and the premier rather pick on marginalized people and use their time.
Transgender rights.
Right, attack gender rights, attack the LGBTQ community, instead of actually dealing with healthcare, electricity, housing, the real problems that people are going through. That, to me, adds to the cynicism when you've got people that are purposely distracting or purposely punching down and beating up on people to distract the anger that people are genuinely feeling. That, to me, is absolutely adding to the problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Middle East. The truth is that passions are high right now on the Gaza-Israel front. The NDP has demanded a ceasefire for a long time. Why do you think it was so hard? Why has it taken so long? It does seem as if we're very close to a ceasefire because it's turning on the question of hostages, releasing hostages. So was that issue neglected and not stressed enough? If it turns out that was the key to a ceasefire, or at least a 2-month ceasefire that people are talking about right now, why did it take so long?
I just want to, just before I get into the answer, I want to approach it with some humility. I don't have all the answers, and I don't want to suggest that I am in any way an expert and I know best on this. I've been trying to lead with compassion and humanity as my guiding principle. And so the reason why we called for a ceasefire very early on is we just saw the toll of the violence was that more and more lives are being lost, and the harm of that and the pain of that compelled us as humanitarians to say we have to do something to stop the violence. But we tied that from the beginning to hostages. We always said
the NDP did.
Yeah, we were very clear that it has to be connected, because we can't get into a scenario where we're valuing lives in different ways or we're ignoring the pain that people are feeling. So we called for a ceasefire unequivocally, and we said at the same time, we also have to make sure that hostages are released. So we maintain that position. I'm just gonna say, bring her on up, good friend, because it's also distracting my heart to hear her cry too much. But I'll hold her, don't worry, she'll be good with me.
This is always a tension with parents, is do you hold, do you, when the daughter's crying? I went through this, it's very hard.
I can't do it. Yeah. She'll be okay though, she'll be good. Yeah. Thank you, you're the best, James, appreciate you.
Okay.
I can just hold her like this, don't worry.
This is amazing, the multitasking. Yeah. This is impressive.
It'll be good.
It'll put you at a disadvantage though in this as I question you, or maybe you'll be.
People will be more like sympathetic to me.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to have them.
It's like almost like she's like a beautiful political prop almost.
Yeah. Oh. But there's pressure. She's got to hush up now, or else we'll think maybe you're not helping the situation. Okay, it's actually a good time to segue, because I wanted to ask you an important question that follows up. And by the way, I rarely heard politicians or anybody show or express, as you did, the humility that you don't pretend to have all the answers. I spent 4 years in the Middle East, and I don't have the answers. And it's always interesting. Everyone's an expert, an armchair expert, but that's another. I don't want to be judging folks about that. So are you worried about the spillover here in Canada? Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia keep coming up. Political intolerance that has arisen in the last few months. You've said that people are telling you that they're now afraid to wear the hijab or head coverings, yarmulke, and you would know about that, head coverings. It's a thing, right, sometimes.
Yeah.
So what do you tell people in Toronto? What do you tell people in your own party about lowering the temperature in Canada and increasing tolerance?
This is actually something that really kind of keeps me up at night, because I'm, we've all seen the really horrific images of what's going on in Gaza, and it breaks our heart to see the violence. I've met with families of Jewish Canadians who have relatives that are hostages, and it's heartbreaking to not know what's happening to your loved one. So I've heard those stories, and I've also heard stories directly from people in Canada that say, as a result, they are afraid to wear their, like you meant, the kippah or yarmulke, women who are afraid to wear their hijab. And sadly, I know what that's like, to be afraid or nervous to wear your article of faith. As a kid, my turban was ripped off my head, and it's something that I was afraid to wear sometimes. I also know the courage it takes to still wear it, so I want to acknowledge brothers and sisters that are wearing their articles of faith and siblings that are doing so. I know it's tough to do. I want to acknowledge your courage and your strength. But I'm really worried that language, when not careful, can add to the flames of both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And that is really troubling to me. Because someone is Jewish does not mean they support the Netanyahu extremist government. And because someone is worried about people dying in Gaza does not mean they support Hamas. And I think it's really important for us to be careful about our language so we don't allow that hatred to spread in Canada. And I've always said this about hatred. Hatred is very much like a fire. Once it takes hold, it spreads. It can't be contained. And if it's okay to hate someone because of their faith or their religion or then their identity or the color of their skin or their sexuality, that hate can spread and grow. And so it's important for all of us collectively to consider this our responsibility, that we have to stop hate in its tracks, not give it any oxygen to breathe. It is for the betterment of society, for us all to be collectively engaged in that work.
For what it's worth, I've been abroad, and I don't think Canadians are any better or worse than anybody else. I do think our political class, by and large, are better than most in terms of tolerance and multiculturalism, from Brian Mulroney to Jagmeet Singh. I've heard it, and I think leadership makes a big difference. And when you look at the US, you can see the contrast. Okay, we might get more audience questions on this later.
Yes.
But there's a lot of other ground to cover, and that's why we invited you today. It's a balancing act for the Democracy Forum. It's a balancing act for you as a politician in your daily life. Let's talk about how the NDP wields the balance of power in a minority parliament. You're keeping the Liberals in government. It's called us.
Can I just point out, though,
Yes.
that I took care,
You did.
care.
You have triumphed. I think it's the questioning that I'm asking that she
smooth
wants to
voice.
hear the answers. So she's listening she's not interrupting. So she's modeling behavior for folks out there. Okay, so you got a supply and confidence agreement. That means it's not a coalition, but the deal is you keep them, you don't trigger an election as long as they move forward on some shared NDP priorities, right? And I wanted to say that personally, as a political columnist, I'm allowed to have opinions. I think it's admirable that you're doing this. Thank you for your service, because you are advancing, you're figuring out how to get some progressive stuff done. The problem for politicians is that you don't get that much credit for the good stuff, and you get blamed for the bad stuff. So there's childcare, there's dental care, there's Pharmacare maybe, but people just tag you to Justin Trudeau's falling popularity. And you said the other day, because you can be mischievous too, I think, right? You're holding the baby here and everything, but you know what I'm going to say. You said the other day that working with the Liberals feels like, quote, wrestling eels covered in oil. They're just slimy. You said slimy. Okay? The covered in oil wasn't enough. You came in with the slimy imagery. It's kind of like red meat for the base, this eel thing, right? So why is it so hard for a left-wing party to do the right thing? Why are your supporters so suspicious of you?
I would say, okay, so just to give you a little insight into like how this all went down, my team came to me with a proposal in 2021. So 2019, we had the first minority government of 2, and it was during the pandemic, so we got a lot of things done. Folks don't know about it. To your point of credit, we fought like everything to get things done. We got CERB, we doubled it. It was initially only going to be 1,000. We doubled it. It was initially not going to include students. We included students.
This is some income equality stuff that you were doing.
Yeah. Put some money back in people's pockets. We fought for that. We fought to include more folks. We fought to expand the coverage. So we got a lot of things done. And then that all motivated us when we got reelected in 2021 to another minority government. My team said, hey, we did some things in the pandemic. It was really helpful, as I'm sure you felt. I'm like, yeah, I felt that we were able to make a difference. Now we've got an opportunity to do the same thing, vote by vote, try to win some victories for people here or there, or we could try to do something bigger. We could try to negotiate a number of things, some things that might take multi-year.
And you need stability for that.
To do that, it's going to take more stability, and it's also going to take an agreement, because it's not just one vote. It's going to be multiple steps to get to the full completion. So I said, yeah, okay, I appreciate the team does that with me. They give me the options, and they said, okay, let's go through pros and cons. I say, well, the cons are going to make a big deal of this. They're going to be really upset at you. They're going to be really angry. They're going to say, why are you working with the Liberals? Frankly, some New Democrats might be angry at you for working with the Liberals. I'm okay, some people will be angry at this. What's the pros? Like, well, we can get some big things done. Like, let's think about that. Let's kind of brainstorm. Like, well, the big thing that we campaigned on was dental care. Maybe we could get dental care done. Like, you're telling me I could get dental care for millions of Canadians, like seniors and grandparents and kiddos. They can't go to the dentist. I can get them dental care. And then the con is that people might be angry that I'm trying to work to make things happen. Yeah, I'll take the dental care. Like, there was no question. I had no hesitation.
And dental care is huge. It's something my newspaper has campaigned on for years. People, it's kind of the forgotten child of healthcare, but oral mouth care is hugely important. But I want to speed up a little bit, though, because you set the table for us here. Let's talk now about what comes next, which is Pharmacare, because that's on the table right now.
Right.
And well,
I guess this is where the slimy stuff comes in. I guess.
Well, or maybe the good stuff, right?
Yeah,
maybe because I like eating eel, frankly. It's part of my sushi selection all the time. So
unagi, is that what it's called?
There you go. See, he's a secret sushi lover too.
I'm a vegetarian though, but I do sometimes look at that stuff and say.
So, Pharmacare is kind of when you think about Medicare without medicines, it was left out in the 1960s when the NDP pushed for Pharmacare. For Medicare, you had to have a compromise to make it work. All these years later, you're fighting for it. But just like dental care, people don't appreciate Pharmacare, probably because a lot of working people have workplace plans or if you're a student, your parents have the plan. But then when you leave, and you're no longer a student, you leave campus, oops, you got to find a drug plan. So the Liberals are on the hook for this, but they missed their deadline last year, and you gave them until March 1st. By the way, that's 4 weeks minus a day or 2 from now. So what's the deal here? Are they going to make it? Tell us about all the secret negotiations.
I'm going to tell you
You're not
everything.
going to tell us, but tell us what's going to happen.
Okay, sure. Well, I will say, just to wrap up on the dental care, because it flows into the Pharmacare, that the reason, like, it wasn't something that this is like a shared thing. We brought forward the idea of dental care multiple times. The Liberals voted no. Conservatives joined them and voted no. We fought hard and got it to happen, and we kept on pushing, and we still are pushing to make sure it's rolled out properly. But when it's all said and done, it's going to be 9 million Canadians who are going to get this. Basically, anyone in our country who earns less than $90,000, who doesn't have coverage, will get it. 1 in 4 Canadians pretty much are going to get dental care because of us, so that's huge. So on the Pharmacare piece,
there are 8 million people who don't have a drug plan. So
yes,
same order of magnitude.
So now we go to Pharmacare. Our sticking point has been from the beginning that we want a program that works for people, working people, for everyday people, for all folks. And the Liberals are nervous about appeasing the big pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. That's been our major sticking point. And we've said, frankly, we don't care about big pharma and big insurance companies. They're not going to like this, so what? And that's really been our major sticking point. And why it's been so difficult is we have it in writing that they should do this, and they're trying to find ways to get out of it. And so it is very much like wrestling eels soaked in oil, because they're slippery, and they're like trying to say, oh, we didn't say that, we didn't do. I'm like, it's written here, and like, no, but we didn't mean it that way. It's not the spirit. So there's a lot of like, we're fighting hard for this. But
part of the problem is it doesn't say in the agreement that it has to be a single payer plan or that it has to be publicly delivered.
You've clearly heard what they've been saying. So that's what they've been saying, but we said it's a national universal, and national universal, even based on the Liberals' own conventions, was single payer, and their own commission report said single payer. So their own
report delivered by a Liberal.
Yes, delivered by a Liberal, said very clearly it should be universal and single payer. And we're like, this is pretty obvious. This is the best way to do it. So what we've said is, because you missed your deadline, now we expect more. We expect more than just a plan and more than just legislation. We want to see something significantly more. And there's been some of it been floated out, so I don't think it's kind of been leaked in the media. We're expecting before, yeah, I guess I'll give you a little juicy tidbit here. You're hearing this first here probably. If you read the articles, you might be able to kind of like surmise this, but I'll tell you to you straight. Our agreement simply said that there should be progress towards Pharmacare, meaning legislation that moves us towards that direction. It didn't actually require them to cover any medication. We're going to require them to cover some medication. So that will be a part of the deal, that we're going to fight to make sure there will be some medication delivered to all Canadians as a part, which was never actually in the agreement initially. So we're going to go beyond what was in there to make up for force them to pay for having delayed it. Well, they could have just given us legislation. They delayed it. Now we're going to make sure there's some medication for Canadians.
So this is martial arts, I guess, right?
We did a little jiu-jitsu throw there, yeah.
Okay, so what if this doesn't happen? What do you do if they don't blink?
This can be pretty serious. Like I've told them this. We mean business. I was at a convention where the party members told me very clearly they expect this. So I've said this is not like, there's things that we can, we have to work out in life. You've got to negotiate. But I said this is very clear. Like this is not one we're messing around with.
But you don't want an election right away. So do you pull the plug on the deal and then you just support them vote by vote, or?
This is now into the stuff of the negotiation. But I've made it very clear that this is a very firm position that we have. Like we're not messing around with this.
Okay. As is probably clear, I've been a supporter of Pharmacare for a long time. I've written dozens of columns. I think it'll save money. But the problem is that only 18% of Canadians think it's the most important healthcare priority. Twice as many think mental health or long-term care is more important, about 35% versus 18% for Pharmacare. So how do you mobilize people? How do you motivate them to support you on this particular fight?
Well, I think if you break it down, it's hard when you're confronted with a list of things to choose what the most important thing is. But fundamentally, our healthcare system should work. And one of the things that we found, and I think this makes sense when you talk to people, if you've got a healthcare system that covers you going to a doctor, but it doesn't cover the medication you need to stay healthy, it just doesn't add up.
Which is much more important than it was in the 1960s when we had Medicare. Like, there are life-saving drugs for high blood pressure, et cetera.
100%. They can change your life. They can absolutely change your life. Even when folks are struggling with mental health, often folks, if they get prescribed
But you're preaching to
medication,
the converted here. How do you persuade other folks?
right. So the way we make the case is, if I think often these things are always best convinced when you give an example of some person. So there are seniors that I've spoken to who literally are cutting pills in half. Pills that could save their life, but they can't afford the full dose, so they cut their pills in half. I don't think we should have that happen in our country. We've got people that literally say, given the cost of food and the cost of everything going up, they say, this week do I buy groceries or this week do I buy my medication? Those stories, I think, are emotionally compelling. And then add to that a little bit of logic, but also emotional, that if that person doesn't get the medication they need, whether it's diabetes medication, what happens at end stage of diabetes? Well, you end up having kidney failure, and then you're on dialysis, and then you go to the emergency room, and then there's a massive use of our healthcare resources. So people would all agree that our healthcare system needs some help, and I can make the argument if we could cover people's medication, we could significantly reduce some of the burden on our healthcare system, and it would make life better for everyone when it comes to our healthcare system. It's not just about covering medication, it is really about completing a healthcare system that can work much better if people aren't getting into the extreme illnesses.
Yeah,
I think that's compelling.
The economics, it's not ideological, it's economical.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so eventually, whatever happens on Pharmacare, there's going to be election sooner or later. Next election is due, fixed election date is late 2025. Let's say there's a minority government, because we talked about this at the last Democracy Forum, so you can't duck or dodge. You're on stage now.
Oh, boy.
Last Democracy Forum, you were very clear that if there was a minority government after that election, you could not support the Conservatives led by Aaron O'Toole. So if there's a minority government after the next election and the Tories have the most seats but they don't have a majority, would you support Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party?
In retrospect, Aaron O'Toole seemed like a very reasonable person. If I could be very blunt with you, I said that, but now, like after the fact, like
I feel your pain. I feel your pain.
this is rough because Aaron O'Toole is actually like he believed in science. He thought that, you know, like if a healthcare professional gives us good advice around the medication, we should probably listen to that healthcare advice. Like normal standard stuff that we
You were
not.
very hard on Aaron O'Toole.
I was hard on him. I gotta probably call him up and say, hey, like, you were reasonable in a lot of ways.
So are you going to be soft on Pierre Poilievre?
No, man, this is a person. Okay, let me give you an example. You know the number one thing that we're concerned about when we talk about cost of living? Groceries, right? Like people go to the grocery store. I'm sure folks, show of hands, grocery store, concerned about the high prices. Yeah, it's super expensive. So we've been saying, we ask Canadians, this is a really important thing. We ask Canadians, what is it? Well, we didn't ask. It was a public opinion poll. We had nothing to do with it, in fact. People were asked, Canadians were asked, what is the number one reason why your groceries are so expensive? Canadians said on their own, corporate greed. And we're like, yeah, that's why we've been going after Galen Weston. That's why we've been saying the only way to bring down prices is to go after these rich corporations, these rich CEOs. Guess what we just learned? This is to bolster the fact that I could never work with Pierre Poilievre because he wants to cut the things that you need. He's going to hurt people. I know who he is. I see him in Parliament. He's mean-spirited. He punches down all the time. He takes shots at the weak. He will never take on the powerful. And the reason why he's never going to take on Galen Weston, his campaign manager, his actual campaign manager of the Conservative Party is a registered lobbyist. I'm losing my throat because I'm so passionate about this.
Active lobbyist.
Active registered lobbyist for Galen Weston, the Loblaws Corporation. So no, he's never going to take on corporate greed. He is never going to take on the real causes of the problems we're going through. His solution for housing is going to sell off public land to rich developers a la Doug Ford.
So does this
So
mean-
no, a huge no. I would never work with someone that is so against working people, that is so against taking on the corporate greed, that is so against just normal common sense things. He talks about common sense. Nothing that he says is actually common sense. He's actually talking about extreme ideas that are going to hurt people, cutting people's pensions, cutting people's EI. He wants to cut dental care, even though for all of his adult life, he has had taxpayer-funded dental care for him and his family, but he doesn't want it for seniors. He voted against it for kids. This is who he is.
So That means, no, because I know you could go on for a while, it's okay. But
I'm angry about that.
The
Sorry,
answer
okay?
is, there is no way you could keep him in power.
There's no way at all. The harm that he wants to do to Canadians,
Okay.
I want to fight that with everything I have.
Okay, got it. Let's change gears, and I
I wanted
apologize.
applause to that, but it's okay.
We
Oh, you're not allowed to applaud, maybe.
no, of course
Are they allowed to?
they can just not disrupt. Let's change gears. One last question. I apologize for going into a bit of overtime before turning it over to, so think up your questions.
Okay.
This week, the foreign interference inquiry started up. And this is a democracy forum, so it's something that I wanted to ask about, defending Canadian democracy against interference from China, but also from India. So let's focus on India, because a lot's been said about China. You took an oath of secrecy, you have high security clearance, and so you saw the intelligence files, and you agreed that there was credible intelligence that Indian government agents killed the president of a Sikh temple in British Columbia, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Given what you know now, how does Canada stand its ground with India? And what do you see ahead for the world's biggest democracy in what is an election year and bilateral relations? How do we handle that?
I would, similar to how I've been really clear about Netanyahu's government in Israel and really isolating and calling it out as Netanyahu's government, there's many thousands of Israelis who protest Netanyahu all the time, and it's unfair to link them together. Similar to India, there's many amazing people in the country, but the Modi government is also a very extremist, fascist government, openly so. And so it is very difficult to have relations with a country that is run by a very right-wing extremist government that is openly now, not just in Canada, we've got the example of intelligence that I can confirm that what the Prime Minister said is very much the case. We've got credible intelligence that links the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil to the Indian government. There's also an open case now before the courts in America, where the indictment is public, that an Indian agent actually contacted an undercover officer in the States to assassinate another, in this case, American citizen on American soil, and that was foiled. So you've got two examples where the Modi government is affiliated with a killing extrajudicial, not like they're tried in court and there's a punishment. This is extrajudicial killing, attempts to kill and killing of Canadians or Americans.
And India sort of laughed off and dismissed our allegations, but of course when the US made the allegations, they changed their tune and took it more seriously.
Very much so.
You've been denied a visa to India. I think it was almost a decade ago. I remember I think you were invited to a conference on human rights or something about Kashmir or women in India, and you were denied a visa. Have you tried since then, and what was the reason for that?
I have not tried since 2013. And at the time, I was very critical of the Indian government, again, not the people, but the government's track record on treatment of minority communities, women's rights, low income, and what's known as low caste. I'm opposed to the caste system, but that exists in India. And the treatment of those folks and academics and journalists, I was very critical. And so I was told when I met with the consulate, actually, that if I was willing to rescind my comments, that I would be given a visa. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that, obviously. And since I've not stopped up and being critical of any government that engages in human rights violations, I think that's an important part of a democracy for us to be critical of those that engage in human rights violations. I'm critical of Canadian government's history when it comes to the treatment of Indigenous people, ongoing and historic. So I think it's very important that we're critical, and the goal of that criticism should be to get to a better place where we do have true democracy. The Indian government has received from Sweden a rating where it's not considered actually even a democracy anymore. It's called an electoral autocracy, that it's got an electoral system, but really they don't have the hallmarks of a democracy.
Moving more towards authoritarianism, reigning in the media and so on. Okay, we're going to open up to questions, but you tweaked me on one quick thing. I didn't know this about you. I was just refreshing my memory the other day and reading about all the protests you're encountering and so on, but you stopped using your original surname because it has a caste linkage, just tell me about that. I don't know the full story.
Kind of a random. So interesting, in the Sikh tradition, this is a little quick caveat, there is a system of oppression, I believe very strongly, that exists in South Asia, which is called the caste system, which is basically a combination of racism and classism. It's based on your birth and what family you're from that denotes your hierarchy in society. and also it's often affiliated, darker skinned folks are often lower caste. So it's very much racism and classism. And one of the Sikh philosophies is to destroy that system of inequality. We think it's also why I believe Sikhs are committed to justice and inequality in general. But what happened is when people came to Canada, people started reusing their caste names. In Punjab, like my parents, both of their degrees, my mom's a teacher, my dad's a doctor, their degrees don't have their last name. They have Singh or Kaur, and they don't have a last name. And the last name you know because you want to know your history and your family, but you don't use it because we're not supposed to accept the caste system. But in Canada, people started using their last names again. So I thought about it a lot. When I ran politically, I decided to not run with my last name, to use Singh instead, because it stands for this idea that we believe everyone's equal. There should be no hierarchy like that. And so a lot of folks advised me not to because I was kind of known by my last name. I was a lawyer and I had a law firm. And I had some, I guess, a little bit of renown, that I was going to lose that because I didn't have the name. So then,
your brand.
Who is this person? Your brand. And so I went ahead with it. I think it was a good choice. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten you did just before you ran for politics.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did.
All right, questions from folks here. Yeah.
I have a question. Jagmeet Singh, you guys sat here in the beginning and spoke about the genocide happening in Palestine. You mentioned anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, which have both been on the rise in Canada. Yes. You didn't mention anti-Palestinian racism. Not all Palestinians are Muslim. Your language erases us as a country and as a people. Palestinians are people. This is not an issue of Islam. And your language erases us. You know who else erases us? Your own leaders. The NDP minister in BC, Selena Robinson, the other day. You know
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to ask a question. I'm going to talk over you. If you talk over, no, actually, you are done talking. If you want to have a question, if you want to ask a question, okay, you're not even talking to our guest. You're not even addressing our guest, and you've now taken over the podium. So, no, but actually, you are done speaking. No, you have a right to ask a question, not to give a speech. That's what. Your time is on. So, if you can ask your question, please do. Please ask it now. Perfect. Okay, your context is over. Ask the question.
Do not condescend me, sir. I am not done
I'm asking you. Okay, actually, you are. Okay. You can ask your question.
If you get to a question, give it.
She said Gaza is a crappy piece of land with no one on it. You know who's on it? 29 family members of mine.
Please ask
You
the
know
question.
who's on it? So what are your thoughts on that? Can you tell
Sure.
me what you have to say about Selena Robinson's
Yes, yes.
disgusting comments about my peoples and my land?
I absolutely will.
Please
Yes.
tell me
Thank
what
you.
have to say about
Yes.
your leaders
Thank
and your
you.
people.
So yeah, on that question, what she said was wrong. Was horribly wrong. She was factually wrong. It was harmful, and it was absolutely wrong of her to do that. There's no question about it. It was harmful, and like you said, factually incorrect. Just purely factually incorrect, harmful, and wrong. So I reject what she said. I think it's absolutely wrong. In terms of the Palestinian racism, you're absolutely right. I've often said that, but today in my response I did not, and I apologize. You're right. It's not just Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, but there's very clearly, specifically, and it should be named as anti-Palestinian racism that exists as well. And I thank you for bringing that point up as well. And I think it's important for us all to be very careful in our language. I think what's very clear is leaders have a responsibility, like you're highlighting, that we can either inflame some of the pain that's out there, or we can do our part to see the pain, acknowledge it, and to give people voice. And I think it's very important that our words do that. So to acknowledge not just the Islamophobia that's on the rise, which is, not just the anti-Semitism, which is, and also acknowledge the anti-Palestinian racism, which is on the rise. And I thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just one question. Okay, I'm sorry. One question. Does anyone else have a question? Yes, right over here. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Actually, just one. He already answered he answered your question. How many questions do you have? How many questions do you have? How many questions do you have? Yeah.
To call for a ceasefire other than words when 30,000 Palestinians have been murdered in 4 months? What is the NDP doing other than spewing words? I want to know actionable steps that you have taken.
Do you have?
Because
Sure.
you just say words, but you don't do anything for Palestine.
Do you have any more questions?
I want him to answer.
Okay, will you sit down then?
Do not mansplain me. I will not
Okay,
sit down.
will you ask? Okay, if he answers your question, will that
I don't
do?
want to sit down.
You don't have to sit down, but okay. All right. I'm gonna, okay, folks, this is actually not, it's actually not, okay, I'm actually, okay, all right, okay. Folks, yeah. Did you come to a Middle East debate or a democracy forum? All right, folks, because I did, and she asked her question, okay?
I understand there's pain, but I can talk. If you do want me to respond, I'm happy to do so. I feel like you might want to express yourself more than you want me to respond, which is fine too. But if you do want me to respond, I'm happy to do so.
But will that be can we then move on and share the microphones with other people? Thank you. All right. I'll take that as, well, you may think that, and it is important, but it's actually a democracy forum. It's actually a democracy forum, and I feel like you're not going to let other people ask questions. Right. Okay. Okay, we have two folks here. Who are not letting our guest. Mr. Singh is our guest. Right. Well, maybe you don't. I do, and I'm passionate about democracy. And we've invited Mr. Singh. I actually am, and Mr. Singh has invited. Well, now you're explaining this to me. So, Mr. Singh, do you want to answer the question?
Yes, I will answer that question. I do, though, think it is important to give people space as well, right? There's lots of people here. There are other people that should have space as well. I think that's an important thing. Often people who are quiet feel intimidated in spaces where they can't speak up as loudly, so I feel like we should offer people space as well. Just a couple of things that you mentioned, just to be really clear. We called for a ceasefire 4 days after. When we saw, I think it's by October 11th, so months and months ago, we actually called for it. We're the first ones to call for it. What did we do beyond calling for it? We wrote letters to the Prime Minister directly. We did multiple letters and multiple statements were made. I asked for an urgent meeting with the Prime Minister. I met with the Prime Minister. You'll recall that Canada did not support a ceasefire for a long time. Canada voted against a ceasefire also in the United Nations. We continued the pressure. We had multiple steps along the way where we raised pressure on the government. Like I said, I met with the Prime Minister. I wrote to him, then I met with them. And then most recently, you will also know, folks that have been following, that Canada voted in favor of a ceasefire. I would say that it's not us alone. I don't want to take all the credit for it because I think that many people were a part of this. Many activists raised their voice. Many people applied pressure. But it is clear that we led the way at the federal level amongst federal political parties, and now Canada has taken the position. So our advocacy, that's what we do. We're advocates. I'm in opposition. And then we were able to get Canada to take a position to support.
Right. I'm sorry. Okay. Folks, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Can we let other people
I called
ask
it before,
questions,
actually.
or are you going to be a mic hog?
Okay.
All right. Anybody else? Does anybody else want to ask a question? Okay, we have a person right over here. And do we have a microphone? Kamara? Or do we have a microphone? Yep, go ahead. Right over here. Okay, go ahead. You can speak.
Hi there. Hi there, Mr. Singh.
Actually, excuse me. You're actually trying to silence us. You're actually trying to silence us. Do you know what you're doing? Okay. Yeah. You are actually trying to silence a democracy forum. You're actually. Yeah. All right. You're obviously not going to stop. Okay. This man is our guest. Yeah. All right. All right. All right, I'm.
Every single one of you, we should be standing up against the illegal state of Israel, the genocide of my people. Every single one of you, you're here to talk about grocery prices and farming and democracy.
I'm sorry.
What about the genocide of Palestinians?
She's not going to leave, so we're in the hands. Okay, I've asked you folks to just let other people speak and ask questions. And if you, well, no, actually, I didn't call on you. There are two people ahead of you in line. I'm sorry, I actually forgot you, and you're next up. Do you want to go ahead? Yes, go ahead.
Let the other person go.
Okay,
You okay?
I'll come back to you. Yes.
Hi there, Mr. Singh. Thanks for taking our questions. You've talked a lot about the cost of living crisis in this country and how Canadians are struggling. I'm sure many students in this room are struggling as well. Food banks, for example, are struggling to keep up with record demand. So with that in mind, you talk a lot about the crisis, the cost of living crisis, but your agreement keeps the government who's largely responsible for it in power until 2025. So I'm just curious, when you see long food bank lines in sprawling tent cities, do you feel any responsibility for the struggles that so many Canadians are facing right now?
By virtue of keeping the Liberals in power.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So the question is, people are struggling, people are hurting right now. What do I do with my power? I got power, I think that's acknowledged. I have power right now in the situation in the sense there's a minority government. I look at the choices that I can do with that power. I think what is most effective if people are struggling with food is to find a way to make food more affordable. And what I've identified, what Canadians have agreed, the major reason why food prices are high is because of corporate greed. Corporations are making record profits, Loblaws, Sobeys, Metro, making more money than they've ever made before, while people are as hungry as they've ever been before, are struggling to buy food. And so what I'm trying to do is to take on that corporate greed. And so what are my options? Cause an election, and then cost about $1 billion, maybe 30, 40 days of an election. How is that helping someone who's struggling to buy their groceries? Versus right now what we're putting in place are legislation that's going to take on the corporate greed of Gale and Weston, directly take away their power and give power back to people. I have that law in Parliament right now, and I'm fighting to make that the law. And then I look at the alternatives. Right now, the alternatives, okay, there's me, there's Justin Trudeau, who's clearly ignored the problem, and there's Pierre Poilievre, whose campaign manager is a registered lobbyist for Loblaws, for the company that is literally ripping off Canadians, which is so greedy. Keep in mind how greedy they are. They've just canceled the 50% off food they were going to throw away in the garbage. Loblaws is going to throw this food away in the garbage. They're so greedy. They want to squeeze so much money out of people that they literally cancel that 50% off of food they're going to throw in the garbage because they want to make more money off of you. And Pierre Poilievre's campaign manager is a registered lobbyist for this company. So will he ever take on that corporate greed? No, he works for them. His campaign manager is a registered lobbyist for them. So my choices are, how do I help people who tell me that they're literally hungry? I'm going to use my power to give people a break. I'm going to use my power to take away power from rich corporations. And that's what we're doing right now. I've got a bill in Parliament that's going to do exactly that.
I mean, I guess politics is about choosing, right? So the alternative is to not supporting the Liberals is... Okay, actually, okay, folks, okay, all right. Did you want to ask your question? Are you ready? Yeah, go ahead. Would you please let her speak? Would you please, I'm asking you to please let her speak. I'm asking you to please let her speak. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, you mentioned Alberta. It was an example of all the things that are being destroyed.
Okay, we actually can't hear her speak. Would you let her speak? I'm asking you. Okay. All right, go ahead, if you can. You've actually already asked your question. Okay. Folks?
You can go ahead if you want.
All right, folks, are you really not going to let her speak, or our guest speak, Mr. Singh? Are you really not going to let them speak? Thank you. Okay. That's not what I asked you. Are you going to let other people speak? Will you let her speak? Are you going to shout her down? Okay, go ahead, please. No, I don't actually want to know why. I'm not. If you're not listening to us, why should we listen to you? Okay, folks. And you've made your statement. Okay, folks. You know, what you're doing is actually anti-democratic. It is anti-democratic. Okay, folks. Try again. Yeah. Mr. Singh?
Okay.
We have a question.
All right.
Yes.
Give it a try. Yeah, you mentioned all the examples in Alberta of provincial policies that are like actively harming people. Ontario, we have the same example. Our healthcare system is actively being destroyed and privatized. Our institutions are being sold. Ontario Place, Science Center, they're being sold to build a spa. Like, when does the government, federal government step in to help? Because by the time Pharmacare comes, we're not going to have a healthcare system left.
Yeesh.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you. I'll just let it go for a second, then I'll get to your question. Yeah.
While you're talking, bombs are dropping. Shame on you. While you're talking, bombs are dropping. The DP, shame on you. While you're talking, bombs are dropping. Shame on you. While you're talking, bombs are dropping.
Just give him a chance to get it out. Obviously, it's a very painful thing for people that are experiencing it. I don't think it makes sense that the only party that took the ceasefire position, took it early, and allied to human rights would be the one you would protest. I hope they bring that energy to Pierre Poilievre, who has never spoken about ceasefire ever, does not support finding a peaceful solution. I hope they bring that energy to the folks that aren't actually leading with compassion. So that would be my response to that. To your question, yeah, on healthcare and what's going on.
And privatization.
And privacy, yeah. I think there's a lot of worry about that, and I see it across the country. People are really worried about healthcare becoming less and less affordable, it being privatized. And the reason why privatization is so bad, for many reasons, but one of the really obvious ones is it costs us more. To spend money, if you're going to have a universal healthcare system and you want to pay for the services at a for-profit clinic, let's say, that clinic is going to have to charge enough of a fee that also includes a profit. So it's always going to be more costly to go through a private system. So it's going to cost us more. And the second thing that happens is when you go into a private clinic, they say it'll be covered. There's always these hidden fees. It always costs you money out of pocket. And it is scary because once you lose something and it becomes private, to make it public again is a lot harder. So there's a lot of urgency around this. I think the federal government could do a lot more to keep our healthcare system public. Absolutely. When we negotiated, or when the federal government negotiated agreements with provinces, they could have required that not a single cent of federal money goes to any for-profit clinic. They could have required that. That's what I would do if I was negotiating those deals. And so it is really frustrating to see this happen in live time in Ontario, in Alberta, and see a federal government that's unwilling to fight back. So I'm putting pressure on them, but I realized the only way we can really defend our public healthcare system, if that's what we want to do, is have more New Democrats elected. Because we're the only ones who truly care about it being universal and public and purely publicly funded, and to not allow privatization in. It's become really clear to me we're the only ones that have that level of commitment. And you can see some evidence of it in Alberta or in BC. Private clinics are now being brought back into the public system. So they're actually buying public clinic or private clinics and turning them into public clinics because they find that they can actually deliver better care more affordably and more efficiently if it's public. So that's some hope that things can be better. And if we make better choices, we can get better outcomes. Like I really believe as tough as things are, there's so many solutions out there and we can make those things happen. And I hope that I can give you some hope that there's someone out there that believes in these things and wants to fight to make them happen.
The second part was Ontario Place.
Oh, yeah.
Science Center, because the feds could step in with the environmental review of the sensitive, species, and they're not doing that. So how do we keep the pressure on them?
Yeah, it's a good point. I actually didn't look at that as a potential way for the federal government to step in. When there's bad decisions going on provincially, I'm always trying to find what is the angle where the federal government can step in and stop it. So thanks for bringing that up.
Maybe you shouldn't have left Ontario politics. Star, I think you had a question. Kareem mentioned, are you Star? Yep. Yeah, okay.
Hi. This relates to actually what you were saying earlier about not working with the conservative leader. I know we're in a really polarized time right now, and I think that a lot of the undercurrents of like needing to negotiate and make compromises within the political system aren't really visible or available to people in general. And so I just kind of wanted to talk to you or like have you talk about sort of your approach to cross-party collaboration and maybe some of the compromises that have to be made in order for things to move forward.
Right, okay. That's a really good question. So,
Because we're seeing Olivia Chow, who was our last guest on the Democracy Forum, working with Doug Ford and getting a lot of money from him.
yeah, that's true.
And Doug Ford working with the Liberals. And
Yeah.
you've ridden a bicycle with Doug Ford, I think, once. I saw.
I did. I kind of regret that a bit now because it made him seem like a friendly fellow, and he's not that. Boy, oh boy. Okay. So it's a little bit inconsistent in a way. Okay. If there is some shared values that you can work on, or if there's agreement to move forward on things that would be good for people, I think you should try to find ways to work together. And I know that's what I'm getting a lot of heat for, because I disagree vehemently with the Liberals on lots of things. We don't share the same viewpoint on lots of things. But there's a way that I was able to get a bunch of things done, and I think it's important and powerful to be able to do that. So that is inherently a compromise where I want to be the one making decisions that are always benefiting working class people, but I'm not there. People didn't elect me to do that, so I'm trying to get the outcomes that are good for people working together. Some of the compromise, for example, if we were in government, we wouldn't delay on some of the things that the Liberals are delaying on. Like we would just bring in legislation on Pharmacare. Like there would be no reason to wait. We could have brought that in last year. So having to work with someone that doesn't agree with the principles, is really concerned about pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies, is tough because I don't agree with that concern. I don't think that that's a worthy concern. Every country in the world that has universal health care, besides Canada, included universal form of pharmacare. So it's very obvious to me that we should be going this way. So working with someone that just doesn't agree on principle is tough. The compromise is that things take longer. I could have got these things done much quicker. We could have passed legislation literally months ago. So that's frustrating. But the question is, for me, like my guiding principle is, how can I use my power to benefit people's lives? Like that's my question. And if my net is that I work with someone that I don't like to work with, or is difficult to work with, but I'm able to net benefit people's lives, that's worth it for me. And so that's what guides me. And the reason why I preemptively would state something like that I would never be able to work with conservatives on anything that matters to me or to people, I don't see how there's shared ground. Like I don't see on any point. On groceries, like I mentioned, they're beholden to corporations. On housing, their plan is to sell public land to rich developers. On anything that matters, they want to cut dental care, they want to cut health care, they want to cut pensions, they want to cut EI. He said all these things already. Harper did all these things when they were in power. So I don't see anywhere where we could work together. Like I don't see, even on something as obvious as the Indian government's involvement in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil, pretty obvious thing that all Canadians should be on the same side of that. I don't really see why he's taking the side of India. Like why would he be supporting the extremist Modi government in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil? Like that to me is just like it's treasonous or something. He didn't get a security clearance.
Mr. Paul, ever refused to get a security clearance.
So
Terrible.
I don't know. I mean, all of this seems very mind-boggling to me. Like on something that I could say, okay, maybe on foreign interference we can work together. Even on that point, he wants to echo and parrot the talking points of the Modi government. Like I just don't get where he's coming from. So I can't see any place where we could work together because there's nothing that we share in terms of workers, in terms of families, in terms of people that are struggling with the cost of groceries. I don't see any area where we can work together. I'm loath to normally write off someone like that, but I want to be clear, I write off Mr. Polyev as someone I can't work with, but I don't write off the people who support him. Because many people who support him see that maybe he can make things better for them. And I want to speak to those people and say, hey, I don't think he's going to make your life better, but I get why you're angry and frustrated. I've got some solutions. So I feel like we can unify people and sometimes be critical and attack the leaders of political parties, but still find a way to unify the people and never give up on the people.
That's all the time we have for questions. We lost a little bit of time. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Kareem Bardisi, for a formal thank you. I'm going to cheat, though,